Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy, and oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. And welcome back to episode 33, entitled Unit Goal Planning, a Deep Dive. Again, this is part of Series 6, Amazing Units by Design. Okay, just a couple things before we get into today's show. I just want to let you guys know I'm still a little bit sick. I am much better, but have been a tad sick for the last couple of weeks, so you're probably going to hear that in my voice. And also today I am recording in a different area, different room at my house, just because we have my niece is staying with us, so she is staying actually in the room that I typically record, so that might affect the sound, hopefully not too much, but in case you notice any difference in the audio, that is because I'm recording in a different area of the house. And then thirdly, I want to remind all of you that this episode is going to be the last episode before we go on winter recess. We will be on winter recess for about 3 weeks, but you can expect us back about mid-January to the end of January. And I also want to give a shout out to Beckett Haight. Thanks for your tweet and letting me know that you were listening. I really appreciate that. So shout out to you. And I also would like to give a shout out to Carrie Balcom. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Carrie Balcom, I've been following on Twitter. She is at Heck Awesome, HECK Awesome, and she provides a lot of video content on YouTube, a lot on sketchnoting, maybe some other things. I've been primarily focusing on her sketchnoting content. This is because I'm currently running a PLC with my grade level, and we're working on non-linguistic representation, and more not just in terms of using it for teaching purposes, but for student learning and how students can learn it. So I actually played one of her videos in one of our PLCs, and have been continuing to try different ways to sketchnote it, or use the sketchnoting, and I'm just really enjoying learning from her videos. So a shout out to Carrie. And in fact, if you are interested in learning more about sketchnoting, I encourage you to follow Carrie. Again, that's at Heck Awesome. She's always producing new content, and I really am very appreciative to those who are, putting information out. And, these are teachers who are busy teachers, as we all are. And, but really, I feel like adding to the availability of professional development and information, making it much easier for teachers like us who are really seeking to always learn new things. So I always really appreciate those who are out there doing that. So thank you, Carrie. Shout out to you. Okay, so going into our first segment, wins and fails of the week. And I just want to re-explain why I've been doing this segment. It's a fairly new segment on the show, but the idea is that something that I try that works for me, you might want to try, and also maybe if there was something that didn't work for me, we can all kind of reflect on what went wrong and maybe make changes or figure out ways to make it better. it's basically just to share ideas. I think that's how, learning really is affected, when we can share different ideas and get different perspectives. So that's why I do this segment. So my win for the week really kind of goes back to my shout out to Carrie earlier in this episode. So yesterday was our last day before going on winter break, and I had basically, it was a day full of rotations. So it was 5 different rotations, and every rotation students were engaged in some kind of holiday activity or learning experience, because I really, for me, that was our celebration of the winter holidays. I'm not judging any teacher who wants to put movies on. I have put movies on in the past. I don't like to. I really never have. I just don't enjoy it. Just because the age that my students are, it's very difficult for them to even sit through a movie. My students are like 5, 6 years old. So, sitting through a movie, there's just very little value, I think, in it, and plus difficult at that age. Again, I'm not judging any teacher who likes to do that. That's fine. My personal choice is I like to take the opportunity to do as much learning as possible. So so our learning really revolved around the winter holidays. So every station there was something going on. The station that I ran was a short Brain Pop video, actually, Brain Pop Junior, and it talked about 4 different winter holidays. Starts with Christmas, then it goes into Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, which I discovered it really is a holiday that my students had not heard of before, and then New Year's. And so we watched this video, but I had pre-made a graphic organizer, so it was just basically 4 boxes with the winter holiday name and a little symbol, like a Christmas tree, a menorah, so different symbols within the boxes. And then after the video discussed each holiday, I would pause it there, and then I would have the students think about what they learned, and then they would sketch an image to represent what they learned. So I've been really trying to work on this non-linguistic representation of learning, which I do think is really, really effective. And of course, if you look at the literature, and there was a previous episode that went all into non-linguistic representation, the most effective is when students then speak about their learning. So I did not take it to that step further because I did have limitations in time. So I do recognize that this could have been improved if there was a component where students then discussed what they learned, but time just did not permit that. However, I will say that I asked students to go home and discuss it with their parents, and I even asked parents to look at it and discuss it with their students, with their children. But in any case, so this was the sketchnoting that I've been learning a lot about from Carrie. And so, yeah, I felt like this was a win because I have been trying to think of places where I can fit this in. If you are going to try non-linguistic representation, it's fantastic, but just also know that there is some time involved because your students are processing information, and then they are also going to represent that information via some type of image that they're producing. So there is time involved. That's not to say don't try it. Please do try it. I think this is such a great way. I've been using this more and more also in my teaching. But it's a word of caution that probably not everything, and also with non-linguistic representation, it could be acting out, things like that as well, or making mental images. But this specific strategy was the sketchnoting, and I just felt like it was really good. I liked that I was able to take the video one step further than just think about it. The actual act of sketching out their learning. So that was my win for the week. I was very pleased with that. Fail for the week, our TA, Miss Dana, she is moving on. I've worked with her for the last 5 years, and the first year she was a monitor for a student that I had, and then she she worked in another classroom and then came back to my classroom. And I've just, she and I have had a really great working relationship over the years. So it was very sad to see her move on. Of course, she's moving on because she has some great things happening in her life, pursuing other areas, and very happy for her. But of course, it is difficult, especially with the young learners, when they're very attached to those around them. So it was difficult to say goodbye. So that for me was a fail. But on the bright side, she is now embarking on some new things in her life. So we wish her well. So Miss Dana, all the best to you and your future. Okay, so going to go ahead and begin now in today's episode of goal planning. So basically, please follow the series. It will make more sense if you listen to the series 6 in order, as I've mentioned in the past. If you're just catching this, you will be able to understand it, but it will make more sense in context of the whole. So today we're going to focus on the goal part of Amazing Units by Design. And again, I want to mention that this is really modeled a lot after Grant Wiggins and Jake Matai's work of Understanding by Design. I have their second edition book, so I'm referring to that. And in their book, they start to discuss goals on page 56. And one of the things they discuss is that really the goals it's the heart of backwards planning. It's really what we're doing with unit designing, good unit designing. It's what that is about. It's all going to be connected to those big goals of the unit. So then, of course, with the whole idea of backwards planning, you're really going to start there. You're starting at your goals. And these are going to be the long-term goals for the unit. And the way that the book explains it is that these long-term goals are what are going to give you perspective on the unit. And I think, in the past, the way that we have done units is we may have lots of different activities, lots of different things on the topic or whatever that unit is, and they might happen to be great by accident, but perhaps they can lead into many different directions. So when we're talking about an amazing unit, this unit is going to be very well defined in what the long-term plans are. So these are really all of your goals. So I'm going to do a little bit of quoting. This comes from page 58, and they go into an explanation of established goals as referring to formal long-term goals, such as state content standards, district program goals, departmental objectives, and exit level outcomes, the desired results that establish priorities for instruction and assessment. These are inherently abiding aims, providing the rationale for the short-term goals that are lessons and unit specific. They typically refer to a complex mixture of academic aims: factual, conceptual, procedural, dispositional, and expert performance based. So this is basically the starting point, and that is what is going to really kind of define your unit and give it solid direction. Because when we're talking about units, you could probably go in many different ways, and that's why you have to really well define, okay, what are our objectives for this? Where do we want students to go? What do we expect them to be able to do? And when you have defined that, that's going to really help you to kind of eliminate some of what you might have taught, because maybe that teaching really doesn't get to those end goals, and it might minimize some of the activities you would have done otherwise. Maybe they would have been good activities, but they don't actually get to what the goals are. So if they don't get to the goals, then they're unnecessary for the unit. And time really is of the essence, so you can't you can't quote unquote teach everything. Again, I say quote unquote because we know that teaching doesn't necessarily equate to learning. So you're going to have to figure out what are the things that I'm emphasizing, what are the things that I am minimizing, what is it that we are going after, and that is what you're going to pursue in the unit. And of course, these are really big decisions, and I would argue that this kind of work is best done in a team of teachers. Obviously, grade level teachers who would be most familiar with the kind of learning that takes place, what's appropriate, not appropriate for students of that age and in that setting. And also, if you have a better idea of the scope and sequence across the grade levels, that is going to be helpful too, because you always want to keep in mind, of course, where students are heading. It just allows for more fluidity within the students' learning. Of course, this becomes a very complicated too, because then you're working with other grade levels, and which is good. We want to collaborate, but it is very complicated at times. So, if you can be on board and at least have some kind of understanding of where students came from and where they're going in the next grade level, that's going to help, especially if you can prepare and build upon. But every grade level is going to have their own objectives, because you're working within limitations as well. Okay, so just to kind of move on from there a little bit. So one of the things that Wiggins and McTighe really stress in Understanding by Design is that in your goal setting, you also want to be including essential questions. Essential questions was briefly discussed in a previous episode, but the essential questions is really going to help you to define your end goals. So they're not, the book really stresses that these are not quote unquote typical objectives, because you're really posing questions, and these a lot of times, well, not even a lot of times, an essential question is essential if it's open-ended. It's not immediately answerable. So it's not like yes or no. It's not so obvious to the learner, because these are questions that mean that they're really going to have to pursue to get to the answer. They're really more inquiry based. It's going to demand a lot of discussion. It's going to demand kind of digging at to get to the bottom of it. You could assume that there will be reflection. There's going to be a lot of work involved to get to the answers that are posed within the essential questions. So that really means that you're thinking of those essential questions as you're thinking of the goals, because these essential questions are going to help to get to the goals. So when we think about goals, one of the things that we'll need to keep in mind is what kind of understandings do we want our students to get to, and what knowledge will they need to have in order to get to those understandings. In a couple of episodes ago, I believe it was episode 31, was knowledge versus understanding, where we discussed that knowledge is really surface level information. That's not to be minimized in value. Students need to have knowledge because that's going to help them to get to the deeper understandings, but we have to keep in mind that understanding is going to be the biggest goals. We want understandings that can be transferred over. Now, I want to also share with you a little bit about essential questions that we at my grade level use in our own units, just to kind of give you an idea. Our last unit of the school year is our animal unit, and it is, I think we called it What's So Amazing About Animals, and that's really that's the essential question that is really guiding everything. But so when we kind of sat down and talked about our animal unit, we had to have some discussions on what are our real goals with this unit. What are we doing with this unit? Where do we want students to go with this? Because when you think about animals, there's so many things that you could be teaching, but the first thing that we had to figure out is, why are we teaching an animal unit? Why do we do that? And it wasn't so easy to have that sit down. I mean, I feel like we kind of grappled a little bit with what are we getting at? What is the heart of this? And at first it was kind of like, well, we want students to be able to research, but I personally wasn't content at that, because I think, yes, we want students to learn how to research, but I still felt like we need to go beyond that. But why is researching animals worthy of our students' time? So we kind of had like a back and forth, and we really had to figure that out. And then we figured that, okay, we're going to really frame this unit under the question of what's so amazing about animals. And we kind of got to the heart of, like, we really want students to understand that, get an appreciation of animals, appreciate life, and appreciate animals and respect their existence, and learn compassion for them. So we kind of framed it under the question of what's so amazing about animals. And so within that, we have several different essential questions each week that we're having students investigate to help get to the heart of it. Now, I have to say, we are not experts at essential questions. I often feel like when we go back to some of our essential questions, we're also asking, is this really an essential question? So you might find that you'll have that back and forth as well, but starting there is really good. So some of our essential questions, like I said, our main one is what's so amazing about animals, but we also needed, within every week, we've added a different question to kind of dig into it. And again, some of this will be kind of working through. It's always, I feel like, an evolution. Our units are an evolution, because they're always changing, and we're always deciding that maybe this is not so essential. But some other posing questions within that is, how do animals change? And we kind of look at their life cycle. How can we classify animals? What are some things that animals do? Where do animals live? How can we take care of animals? And then going back into what's so amazing about animals. So it's really, these are essential questions that are going to help us get to the big ideas of the unit that we have defined, that are, animals. There is a life cycle. There is a way that we can classify animals, and there are lots of ways. So we actually had to sit down and say, you know what, for purposes of this unit and time limitations, and grade level, age level, really, we're going to really just focus on looking at birds, mammals, and fish. You have to have some kind of cutoff, and understanding that we can't get into everything because of time limitations. We are also looking at the fact that there are different kind of animals, and each animal has different abilities. Animals are really, where they live is going to limit some of the things that they do. So habitats become very important to the animal. And then also another big idea that we're hoping to get to with our questions is that there's different foods that different kinds of animals eat, and that's also going to depend on their location. So these are the things that we said, these are going to be big ideas within the unit, and then we pose the essential questions. So this becomes part of our goals. We really want our students to get to those enduring understandings, so we pose essential questions to help students get to those understandings. Now, when we look at skills as being part of our end goals, the book really talks about skills that are not just necessarily discrete techniques, but quote unquote, but also to complex procedures and methods. That quote is from page 59 of the Understanding by Design edition 2 book. So here what they're talking about is that when you're designing your unit and you're thinking about the skills, you're really thinking about also what is going to require guided practice and coaching by the teacher, because we can't just say, oh, by the end, oh, students are going to debate, students are going to produce X, Y, and Z. You have to think about, but how are the students going to know how to do that? What kind of coaching and guiding are students going to be given to be able to do that? Now, the book, also on page 59, kind of gives some examples of what those skills might be at the end, like solve problems via long division or critique written work against audience and purpose. So a skills goal as an end goal is really going to be one that focuses more on the processes of something and maybe the way you approach something and the techniques to it. And in Understanding by Design, they really kind of caution that a lot of teachers will really forget this part. They will not really include in the learning how to get to something like that. They just kind of assume that it's going to happen, though it hasn't really been designed correctly. So this takes us in, as unit designers, to really have to think about, well, I need to kind of teach the learning process. I need to teach them how to learn how to learn and how to perform in a certain way. So what is the coaching that's going to go into it? What kind of experiences and perhaps feedback is going to go into it? Now, I think about, like, right now we're in bimester 3 and we're working on how-to book. So it's a lot of procedural writing that's happening in writing workshop right now. And it's not just writing how-to books, but a lot of our end goals here is using a checklist and learning how to reflect on, am I producing good writing? So some of that is going to be things that you would see in a how-to book, like, did I include steps? Did I use diagrams and labels? Did I use exact language to make what I'm trying to say very clear? And so we have to have days that are really programmed into what we're doing to stop and reflect. And I used a checklist to do this, and of course first modeled based on, we modeled and checked another like another writing piece, and kind of use that as a way to teach the students on how to reflect, and then have them reflect on their own writing. And of course it is a process and it takes time, and some students, you're going to find that they really need to have a lot of coaching and how to stop and reflect and actually reflect, because I have one student in particular who will just, yes I did that, without stopping and going back. And we talk about the importance of, we're always trying to make our writing better. So one way to do this, we actually have to stop, we have to reread, and we have to ask ourselves, did I do it? And if not, I'm going to be honest to myself about it, because that's the only way that I can improve my writing. So it does take time. So you have to really schedule in days to go through the process. And in the beginning, I used to feel like, oh, I'm wasting a day of writing workshop because my students, it takes a lot of time. So days that you're doing that, they probably have very little writing time. But I've finally gotten to the place where I feel okay and I can see the value of it. So I'm okay if most of writing workshop is sitting and reflecting, because I think students need to learn how to do that. And if we don't ever schedule time to do it, it simply is not going to happen. We can't expect, a lot of times we'll say, well, my students, I taught that we need capitals and periods, but my students just don't do that. But have we also given them time to stop and reflect and check on that? Because if not, we can't actually expect that it's going to happen. We hope that after many sessions of reflecting, that this will become an internal process. That's our greater end goal. That's what we hope for. But we also have to stop and give time to that piece as well. So another end goal to keep in mind, aside from just the skills, are going to be any standards. So this could be content standards. It might also be outcome standards, but all of those would kind of get lumped into when we're talking about standards. Now, we want to start there because we want to understand what it is that students are supposed to know, what is it that students are supposed to do. Wiggins and McTighe, I think, do a really good job in explaining really about how to get to the heart of standards, because it's easy to read a standard, but sometimes even for us teachers, we read a standard and we say, well, what exactly is that asking students to do? And this is a lot of work that we do grade level, because standards are meant to be mastered by the end of a certain period. So by the end of the grade level, the end of the school year, a student will have mastered the standard. But let's say we're starting a standard, we started to learn a standard in bimester 2. Well, certainly the student has until bimester, the end of the school year. For us, that would be the end of bimester 5 to master the standard. So it really requires us really kind of unpacking those standards to understand, okay, what does that standard, what would that look like in bimester 2, and then in bimester 3 and 4 and 5. So it's sort of a complexity in a learning maybe continuum, if you want to think of it that way. And the way that Wiggins and McTighe talks about is they really argue the need to really unpack the standards. And if you have access to their book, you can look at this on pages 62 through 65. But just to kind of summarize, is you're really kind of wanting to look at the what are the verbs telling you, what are the adjectives and the nouns. So I'll read the actual standard that they use as an example on page 64, and I'll give you an example of how you can unpack standards. So the example they give is all students will connect mathematics to their learning by understanding the interrelationships of mathematical ideas and the roles that mathematics and mathematical modeling play in other disciplines and in life. Okay, so if you look at the adjectives in there and the nouns, you see it says mathematical modeling in various disciplines and life. If you look at the verbs, so this is giving you like an implied performance. Give examples of effective mathematical modeling of real life data or phenomena. Critically review a mathematical model for its appropriateness to a given real life situation. So they're kind of looking at what are the verbs that exist there and what would that mean in terms of what they're doing. And this, of course, can help you with essential questions as well. So if you look at it carefully, you can come up with your questions via the standards as well. So to quote their essential question that they have attached with that standard is, what's the pattern and how do you know if your model is a good one for a particular situation? And then the way they state the understanding, so this would be your understandings that would come out of that standard. Mathematical models help us simplify, abstract, and analyze experience using data, and so that we might better understand the relationship, and mathematical models must be viewed critically so that they do not mislead us. And then performance tasks that they have attached to that standard. Have students create a mathematical model for selected real-world situation, such as seasonal temperatures, that has messy data and various plausible models of the relationships, and then also have students critically review a mathematical model for its appropriateness to a given situation. So you can see how you can actually really dig deeper at a at a standard to really get to what are the big ideas, what are the implications, what is it really asking our students to do, and then come up with the performance tasks and essential questions that are going to get out of the big understandings from that standard. The last end goal that I want to discuss today is the big idea. So that's also going to be one of your end goals. So thinking about big ideas are really what is it's really driving your unit, right? It's it's the so what of your unit. Like, why is this important, and why is it worthy of my students' time to work towards, and why is it worthy of them knowing and understanding and being able to do? These are your core concepts. These are your big ideas. One important aspect about big ideas is that they are transferable. This is important because this is where your other topics and skills can really come into place, because they're so transferable and they're kind of like an umbrella. You can house a lot of learning within it, right? So if you think of, let's say I'm an English teacher and I'm teaching a book, well, you're limited within that book. Whereas it's better if I'm teaching, maybe my big idea is the idea of, the forces of love and hate and how that plays out through literature. And then then I'm actually teaching through more of a theme, and I can include other topics where, like a book. Whereas if I'm teaching a specific book, I'm really more limited as to what that particular book might be able to offer me. Now I'm going to quote a quote from page 65 of the Understanding by Design edition 2 book. So they are quoting from a cognitive psychology perspective from the book How People Learn, which was a book by Bransford, Brown, and Cocking in 2000. So this is one of their findings that is in How People Learn. A key finding in learning and transfer literature is that organizing information into a conceptual framework allows for greater transfer. Learning with understanding is more likely to promote transfer than simply memorizing information from a text or a lecture. And then experts first seek to develop an understanding of problems, and this often involves thinking in terms of core concepts or big ideas. Novices' knowledge is much less likely to be organized around big ideas. Novices are more likely to approach problems by searching for correct formulas and pat answers that fit their everyday intuitions. Now, I really like on page 66, they kind of describe a big idea as really the linchpin, and then they go on to explain that the linchpin is a device that keeps a wheel in place on an axle. So it then becomes essential. Without it, the wheel could not function, and that's really the idea of a big idea within a unit. It's holding every single thing together. So it's really without it, you have a unit that perhaps lacks direction, and consequently you will not be a very effective unit. Okay, the book also goes on to give more examples of questions and then big ideas that those questions might help get to. And these ones are coming from the 5 biggest ideas in science, and that's coming from a 1997 book from Wynne and Wiggins. So here are the examples. So question, do basic building blocks of matter exist? And if so, what do they look like? And that gets to the big idea number 1, that the physics model of the atom. Okay, another question, what relationships, if any, exist among different kinds of atoms, the basic building blocks of the universe? That gets to big idea number 2, chemistry's periodic law. Next question, where did the atoms of the universe come from and what is their destiny? That gets to big idea number 3, astronomy's Big Bang Theory. Next question, how is the matter of the universe arranged in planet Earth? That gets to big idea number 4, geology's plate tectonics model. Next question, how did life on Earth originate and develop? And that gets to big idea number 5, biology's theory of evolution. So you can see how you have the core idea or the big idea of the unit, and then your essential questions are then designed to get to that big idea. What are you really getting at? It's the so what, why does it matter, and it's going to be transferable. It's not just important today in this classroom within these walls, but arguably outside as well. Now, something that Wiggins and McTighe really caution against is, well, not really caution against, but emphasize the fact that the term big can be perhaps a little misleading, as they say, and I'm going to quote here, page 67, a big idea is not necessarily vast in the sense of a vague phrase covering lots of content, nor is a big idea a basic idea. Rather, big ideas are at the core of the subject. They need to be uncovered. We have to dig deep until we get to the core. So that's what they're really talking about in terms of big, for a big idea. And then at the end of this paragraph, so I'm quoting again, it says they are not obvious. In fact, most expert big ideas are abstract and counterintuitive to the novice, prone to misunderstanding. And then they give some, they go on to give some more examples. So basic term ecosystem, the core idea of that would be natural selection. Basic term graph, core idea for that would be best fit, curve of the data. Let's see a couple more. I'm not necessarily going to go through all of them. Story, so basic term would be story. Your core idea would be meaning as projected onto the story. And then basic term composition of a picture. Core idea might be negative space. So so here you can see that they can be kind of counterintuitive ideas and things that are not very obvious. And really, to kind of summarize the idea of a big idea, I would also like to just do a quick quote from page 68. It says, a big idea is therefore both central to coherent connections in a field of study and a conceptual anchor for making facts more understandable and useful. So your big idea is really going to be the way that your unit is going to be focused, which is why we include it in the goals, because before you start doing all the other planning, you really need to know what the focus of the unit is going to be. I like the way the book describes it. It talks about thinking of the big idea as like a conceptual lens for the study, and I just think that's such a great way to define it, because it's the implication there is that you might have different angles, but you have to have an agreed upon angle that you're going to focus on. That's what your big idea is. And also, I would say a couple other things to keep in mind is it's going to require uncovering. So you can't actually just get to it through, let me cover this material and we get through it. There's going to be inquiry included. There's probably going to be some research. Yes, there is going to be some coverage, but that's not the meat of what your unit is. Your coverage is probably just going to be allowing to have students access what is basic and necessary for them to get to all the deeper things, and also that it's going to allow for transfer. And on that note, it is a wrap for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was really kind of a deep dive into what goals you would be working towards when we talk about beginning with the end goals in mind. So we went through all the different kinds of goals that you would be keeping in mind. And something else to keep in mind is with this, we being Time to Teach, is now on winter recess. We will be resuming back in January. The projected date is January 18th, and this is simply because with the holiday season, my personal schedule is going to be different. I'll be in and out of the city, so I won't really have a regular schedule, and that just makes things difficult. I will still be working on episodes when I can, when I'm here at home. So in the meantime, if you've missed any of the previous episodes, go back, get caught up on Time to Teach. Also, if you're listening and you enjoy, let me know. Would you tweet to me? My Twitter handle is at TamijJ, that's TAMIJ123. In the meantime, wishing you happy holidays. May you have a wonderful holiday season with friends and family. Until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.